July 24, 1943, 7:37 p.m. RAF Elsham Wolds, Lincolnshire, England. Flight Sergeant Tommy Wickham steps onto the wing of Halifax Mark II bomber LK-797 and feels the metal still radiating afternoon heat through his leather boots. At 23 years old, a wireless operator with 17 missions logged in his worn diary, he knows the routine by heart. Check equipment, test frequencies, verify the day's codes. But something feels different tonight. Very different. Inside the fuselage, stacked beside 4-pound incendiary bombs and high-capacity explosive containers, sit 24 brown paper packages sealed with military adhesive tape. Each measures approximately 12 inches long by 6 inches wide. Wickham kneels and tears the corner of one with his survival kit knife. Inside, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of strips shimmer under the amber interior lamp of the bomber. They're paper strips covered with aluminum, he mutters, frowning. Wickham holds one up to the light, approximately 10.5 inches long by 0.8 inches wide, the size of a school bookmark. Light, shiny, apparently harmless. "Wickham! Briefing in 5! Shouts the navigator, Flying Officer Peter Harraway from the upper hatch. Tommy gathers the packages back together, wipes his hands on his flight suit, and climbs the ladder to the base briefing room. The room is packed. Crews from 76 Squadron filling rows of folding wooden chairs, the smell of woodbine tobacco and nervous sweat mixing with steam rising from tea mugs. At the front, on the wooden platform, hangs an enormous map covered by a green military curtain. Wing Commander Cedric Masterman, immaculate moustache, medals clinking on his blue tunic chest, pulls the curtain with a theatrical gesture. The map reveals red lines crossing the North Sea and converging on a port city in northwestern Germany, Hamburg. Murmurs ripple through the room. Hamburg means heavy flak. Hamburg means 130-foot concrete flak towers equipped with 128mm battery guns. Hamburg means Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighters guided by radar, circling like invisible sharks in the darkness. "Gentlemen," Masterman begins, tapping his wooden pointer on the map, "tonight 791 bombers will strike Hamburg, Lancasters, Halifaxes, Stirlings, the largest concentration of force Bomber Command has ever assembled for a single target. 791 aircraft. The number settles over the room like lead weight. That's nearly every operational heavy bomber in RAF Bomber Command's arsenal. But tonight," Masterman continues, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, "tonight we have a secret weapon, code name, Window." He nods to an intelligence officer who brings forward a single aluminum strip, holding it up like a sacred relic. The metallic surface catches the overhead lights, sending dancing reflections across the briefing room walls. "Each of you will carry bundles of these strips. They are cut to precisely 27 centimeters, the wavelength of German Würzburg radar." Masterman pauses for effect. "When you drop them from your aircraft, German radar will see not one bomber, but hundreds, thousands. Their entire defensive network will be saturated with false targets." Wickham leans forward in his chair. "For 2 years, RAF Bomber Command has been bleeding crews at an unsustainable rate. 1 in 3 bombers never returns from Germany. The Luftwaffe's integrated radar defense system, the Kammhuber line, has transformed night raids into lethal games of chance. Ground controllers vector Bf 110 night fighters directly onto approaching bombers with terrifying precision. You never see them coming. Just the sudden hammer of 20mm cannon fire tearing through aluminum skin, fuel tanks erupting into orange fireballs at 18,000 feet. Each aircraft will carry approximately 1 ton of window bundles," Masterman explains. "Crews will drop 1 bundle per minute through the flare chute beginning at the enemy coast. Do not, I repeat, do not deviate from this schedule." Wickham does the mental arithmetic. 1 bundle per minute, from the Dutch coast to Hamburg and back. That's roughly 90 minutes over enemy territory, 90 bundles. Multiply that by 791 bombers, over 70,000 individual bundles, millions of aluminum strips falling through the night sky like metallic snow. Window has been withheld from operations for 2 years, Masterman adds, his voice hardening. Churchill himself worried the Germans would copy it and use it against our own defences, but our losses have become unsustainable. Tonight, we roll the dice. The invisible threat. German radar supremacy, July 24, 1943. 8:15 p.m., Stade Air Defence Station, 25 miles west of Hamburg, Germany. Obergefreiter Klaus Hoffmann adjusts the rubber eyepiece of his Würzburg-Riese radar scope and watches the green phosphorescent sweep rotate across the circular display. At 19 years old, he has operated this massive 7.5-meter parabolic dish for 8 months, guiding Luftwaffe night fighters onto RAF bombers with mechanical efficiency. The job requires intense concentration, tracking altitude, speed, bearing, while simultaneously relaying coordinates to the fighter pilot via radio link. The Würzburg-Riese represents the cutting edge of German radar technology. Mounted on a concrete turntable, the giant dish rotates with hydraulic precision, its transmitter pulsing electromagnetic waves at 53-centimeter wavelength. When those waves strike a metal object, a bomber fuselage, for instance, they bounce back to the receiver. The return signal appears as a bright blip on Hoffmann's scope. Range, bearing, altitude, everything the night fighter pilot needs to intercept. Tonight, Hoffmann's sector controls Hauptmann Werner Barker, a 29-year-old veteran flying a Bf-110G4, equipped with Liechtenstein BC airborne radar. Barker has 11 confirmed kills. His aircraft bristles with 4 7.92-meter machine guns and 2 20mm MG-FF cannons. When guided correctly, the Bf-110 is lethal, approaching from below and behind, where the RAF bomber's blind spot leaves the tail gunner helpless. This is the Kammhuber line in action. Named after General Joseph Kammhuber, the system divides German airspace into a grid of overlapping radar zones called boxes. Each box has its own Würzburg-Riese ground radar, its own Freya early warning radar, and its own dedicated night fighter. When British bombers enter a box, ground controllers direct the fighter onto the target with verbal commands. Turn starboard 10 degrees, climb to 5,000 meters, target at 2 kilometers, bearing 280. It works devastatingly well. Between January and June 1943, RAF Bomber Command lost 1,047 aircraft over Germany, an average of 174 bombers per month. That's not just machines. That's 7,829 trained airmen dead, missing, or prisoners of war. Young men from Yorkshire and Wales and Scotland, their families receiving telegrams beginning with, "The Air Ministry regrets to inform you." The statistics haunt Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, commander of RAF Bomber Command. Crew morale teeters on the edge of collapse. Bomber pilots know the grim arithmetic. A standard tour of duty requires 30 operational missions. Statistically, fewer than half will survive that long. Some crews don't make it past their 5th sortie. The problem is German radar. You can't see it, you can't shoot it, you can't bomb it effectively because the stations are dispersed across hundreds of miles, and every night those invisible electromagnetic eyes guide enemy fighters with surgical precision. British scientists have known the theoretical solution since 1937: overwhelm enemy radar with false echoes. If you drop millions of reflective objects that mimic bomber signatures, the radar screens become saturated with phantom targets. Real bombers disappear into electronic noise. The British called it window. The Americans would later call it chaff. The concept is elegant. Cut aluminum foil or metallized paper into strips exactly half the wavelength of enemy radar. When dropped from altitude, these strips flutter and tumble through the air, each one reflecting radar signals just like a real aircraft. But for 2 years, Winston Churchill refused to authorize its use. His reasoning was coldly pragmatic. If we use window against German radar, they will immediately copy it and use it against our own coastal defences. Britain's radar network, chain home stations lining the southern coast, represents the country's primary defence against Luftwaffe bombing raids. If the Germans saturate those radars with chaff, they could launch devastating attacks with impunity. Yet by summer 1943, the equation has shifted. RAF losses over Germany have become catastrophic. Something must change. Churchill reluctantly authorises window for operational use, gambling that the immediate tactical advantage outweighs the long-term strategic risk. Back at Stade, Obergefreiter Hoffmann sips cold coffee and watches his scope. The sweep rotates. The display remains empty, no contacts yet, but his shift doesn't truly begin until around midnight, when the RAF bombers typically arrive. He doesn't know it, but tonight will be unlike any other night of his young career. Tonight, his radar will betray him. 791 birds taking flight, July 24, 1943, 9:45 p.m. RAF Mildenhall, Suffolk, England. Squadron leader James Jimmy Flint climbs through the belly hatch of Lancaster ED-88 and settles into the pilot's seat. The cockpit smells of hydraulic fluid, rubber, and the faint residue of cigarette smoke embedded in fabric upholstery. At 27 years old, with 31 missions logged, Flint is one of Bomber Command's veteran pilots, a statistical anomaly in a command where the average life expectancy hovers around 12 operations. His flight engineer, Sergeant Bill Morrison, slides into the seat beside him and begins the engine start checklist. 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, 1,460 horsepower each. Morrison flips switches with practiced efficiency. Battery on, fuel pressure checked, magnetos armed. Port outer, Flint calls. Morrison presses the starter button. The propeller blade rotates slowly, once, twice, then the Merlin coughs to life with a deep-throated roar. Blue exhaust flame shoots from the exhaust stubs. The entire airframe vibrates. One by one, all 4 engines spool up to idle. The Lancaster trembles like a leashed animal. Outside the cockpit windows, Flint watches other bombers lighting up across the dispersal area, Lancasters, Halifaxes, Stirlings, their navigation lights blinking red and green against the deepening dusk. 791 bombers. Across dozens of bases stretching from Yorkshire to East Anglia, the largest bomber force in history prepares for takeoff. Each aircraft carries 7 crew members: pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, mid-upper gunner, tail gunner. That's 5,537 men about to fly into the teeth of the most sophisticated air defense network ever constructed. At 9:52 p.m., the control tower fires a green flare, the takeoff signal. Flint advances the throttles. The 4 Merlins howl. The Lancaster lurches forward, tail rising as speed builds. The grass runway blurs beneath the wheels. At 105 miles per hour, Flint eases back on the control column. The bomber lifts off, climbing into the twilight sky. Behind him, another Lancaster follows at 60-second intervals. Then another, a steady stream of heavy bombers clawing for altitude, their loaded weight, fuel, bombs, ammunition, crew, and tonight 1 ton of aluminum strips, pushing the aircraft to maximum gross weight limits. In Lancaster ED-188, Flint banks gradually to starboard, following the prescribed route northeast toward the coast. Below, the patchwork of English farmland fades into darkness. Blackout regulations mean no lights betray villages or towns. Only the silver thread of rivers catches moonlight. "Nav to pilot, turn onto heading 078 in 2 minutes," crackles the navigator's voice through the intercom. Flight Lieutenant David Chen, a 24-year-old from Hong Kong who joined the RAF in 1940, hunches over his navigation table in the belly of the bomber, plotting their course with parallel rulers and dividers. Tonight's route takes them northeast across the North Sea, crossing the Dutch coast near the Frisian Islands, then continuing northeast to Hamburg. Total distance, approximately 450 miles. Flight time, roughly 3 hours round trip. But the true challenge isn't distance, it's concentration. 791 bombers must arrive over Hamburg within a 45-minute window. Too dispersed, and the German defences can focus on individual aircraft. Too concentrated, and mid-air collisions become inevitable. The stream must flow like a river, dense enough for mutual protection, dispersed enough for safety. At 10,000 feet, Flint levels off and settles into cruise configuration. The oxygen system hisses, feeding pure air through rubber masks. Temperature inside the cockpit hovers around freezing. Outside, it's 30 degrees below 0 Celsius. The gunners in their exposed turrets suffer the worst. Electrically heated suits providing marginal comfort against the brutal cold. Behind Flint, in the fuselage, wireless operator Tommy Wickham sits beside the bundles of window. Each packet weighs about 2 pounds and contains roughly 2,000 individual aluminum strips. His orders are clear. Beginning at the enemy coast, drop 1 bundle per minute through the flare chute. The strips will flutter down through 20,000 feet of air, spreading into a massive metallic cloud that radar cannot distinguish from real bombers. Wickham checks his watch. 10:17 p.m. They'll cross the Dutch coast around 11:40 p.m. He has 83 minutes to wonder if this crazy scheme will actually work. Across the North Sea, 791 bombers drone eastward through the darkness. Lancasters from 1, 3, 5, 6 and 8 groups. Halifaxes from 4 group, Sterlings from 3 group. Each aircraft carries approximately 8,000 pounds of bombs. 4-pound incendiaries, 30-pound incendiaries, 500-pound high-explosive bombs, 1,000-pound cookies, and for some, the massive 4,000-pound or 8,000-pound blockbusters designed to collapse entire buildings. Tonight, Hamburg will burn. The question is how many RAF crews will survive to see dawn. Window. The revelation, July 24, 1943. 11:43 p.m. over the Dutch coast, 18,000 feet above the Frisian Islands. Enemy coast ahead, 5 miles, announces navigator David Chen through the intercom. Pilot Jimmy Flint tightens his grip on the Lancaster's control column. Below, the Dutch coastline appears as a dark smudge separating Black Sea from Black Land. Flak batteries begin firing, orange bursts blossoming in the night sky, delayed concussions rattling the bomber's airframe. The Germans know they're coming. In the fuselage, wireless operator Tommy Wickham tears open the first window bundle. 2,000 aluminum strips shimmer in his hands, each precisely 27 centimeters long, 2 centimeters wide, weighing almost nothing individually, but collectively representing 2 years of British scientific research compressed into metallized paper. Pilot to crew, we're crossing the coast. Wickham, start dropping window on my mark. Wickham positions the bundle over the flare chute, a vertical tube running through the bomber's floor, normally used to deploy photo flash flares for bombing assessment. He glances at his watch. 11:43:22 p.m. Mark, Flint commands. Wickham releases the bundle. The aluminum strips tumble through the chute, sucked out by 200-mile-per-hour slipstream. For a moment, he sees them caught in the Lancaster's navigation lights, a brief metallic shimmer. Then they vanish into darkness, fluttering and spinning as they fall toward the sea, 18,000 feet below. He waits exactly 60 seconds and drops the second bundle, then the third, then the fourth. Behind and beside Lancaster ED-8A8, 790 other bombers execute identical procedures. Every 60 seconds from every aircraft in the stream, bundles of window cascade into the night. By 11:50 p.m., in 7 minutes after crossing the coast, the RAF has dropped over 5,500 bundles, more than 11 million individual aluminum strips. They create a radar return cloud 30 miles long, 10 miles wide, and 8,000 feet deep. 25 miles away, Stade Air Defense Station. Obergefreiter Klaus Hoffmann is staring at his Würzburg-Riese radar scope in complete confusion. At 11:44 p.m., his screen showed 4 distinct contacts, 4 RAF bombers approaching from the northwest at 18,000 feet. Standard operating procedure. He begins vectoring his assigned night fighter, Hauptmann Barker, toward the nearest target. Barker, turn to heading 290, target at 15 kilometers, bearing 285, altitude 5,500 meters. Hoffman transmits. Roger, 290, Barker acknowledges. But then at 11:45:32 p.m., Hoffman's scope explodes with contacts. 4 blips become 40, then 400, then 4,000. The entire display fills with glowing returns, overlapping and merging, until the screen looks like someone dumped green paint across it. Hoffman frantically adjusts the gain control, trying to reduce sensitivity, but it makes no difference. The contacts multiply like cancer cells. Control, this is Stage 2, Hoffman transmits to the sector command post, his voice rising with panic. I cannot count the contacts. Hundreds, thousands. The entire screen is saturated. Stad 2, confirm your equipment is functioning correctly, the controller responds. Hoffman checks his instruments. Power supply, normal. Transmitter output, normal. Receiver gain, normal. The Würzburg Riese is operating perfectly. It's simply telling him something impossible. The sky is filled with 10,000 bombers. Equipment normal, he reports. But I cannot vector fighters. I cannot distinguish individual targets. In his Bf 110 night fighter, Hauptmann Barker listens to the radio chaos erupting across all frequencies. Every ground controller in the Kammhuber line is reporting the same phenomenon. Radar screens completely saturated, impossible to track individual aircraft, night fighter control system collapsing. Bake switches on his airborne Liechtenstein BC radar. The small scope in his cockpit shows the same insanity. Hundreds of returns, flickering and pulsing, providing no useful targeting information. He's flying blind, hoping to stumble across a bomber by visual contact alone. In the vast darkness at 18,000 feet, those odds are astronomically against him. All fighters, broadcasts the sector controller, abandoning standard procedures. Proceed to Hamburg area, free hunt, attempt visual contact, free hunt. That means the sophisticated radar-guided interception system has failed completely. German night fighters are reduced to World War I tactics, flying around hoping to spot an enemy silhouette against moonlight or starlight. It's exactly what the British planned. Chaos in the Luftwaffe command, July 25, 1943. 12:17 a.m. Luftwaffe Fighter Division 3 Headquarters, Dielen, Netherlands. General Major Joseph Schmid stands before a massive plotting table watching Women's Auxiliary Corps. Plotters move markers across the map with long wooden rakes. Each marker represents a group of bombers, or what used to be groups. Now the table is covered with hundreds of markers, clustering and overlapping until the entire route from the Dutch coast to Hamburg disappears under a sea of wooden blocks. This is impossible, Schmid mutters, gripping the table edge until his knuckles whiten. His chief operations officer, Oberstleutnant Victor von Lossberg, stands beside him, holding a telephone receiver connected to various radar stations. He's been listening to increasingly frantic reports for the past 20 minutes. Sir, every Würzburg and Freya station from the coast to Hamburg is reporting complete saturation, von Lossberg reports. They cannot track individual aircraft. The British are using some form of jamming, possibly dropping reflective materials. Schmid closes his eyes. The Kammhuber line, General Kammhuber's masterpiece, 2 years of construction and refinement, has just become worthless. The entire system depends on ground controllers guiding fighters onto specific bomber targets. Without clear radar returns, there's nothing to guide. How many night fighters do we have airborne? Schmid asks. Approximately 220 aircraft from various Nachtjagdgeschwader units, von Lossberg answers, consulting his clipboard. But they're reporting the same problem. Airborne Liechtenstein radars are also saturated. Pilots cannot acquire targets. 220 night fighters, highly trained crews flying sophisticated radar-equipped aircraft, rendered impotent by pieces of aluminum foil. In the sky over northern Germany, those 220 Bf-110 and Ju-88 night fighters circle aimlessly. Some pilots spot RAF bombers visually and manage to engage, their cannon fire briefly illuminating the darkness before the target escapes into the bomber stream's protective mass. But most fighters see nothing. The bombers are there. The roar of thousands of Merlin and Hercules engines vibrates through the night air, yet they remain invisible, protected by clouds of metallic strips fluttering slowly earthward. Hauptmann Werner Barker, the veteran with 11 kills, flies his Bf-110 in frustrated circles over the Elbe River estuary. His Liechtenstein radar screen shows a hopeless tangle of returns. He tries following one particularly strong return, only to watch it fade and dissolve, probably one of the thousands of ghost echoes the British are somehow generating. At 12:28 a.m., Bach spots a silhouette against the moon, a Lancaster, perhaps 3 kilometers ahead. He advances throttles and begins pursuit, but the Lancaster's rear gunner sees the Bf-110's exhaust flames. The bomber begins weaving, descending, turning, climbing, exploiting its maneuverability advantage. Barker fires a burst from his 20mm cannons, but the tracer rounds arc harmlessly into empty sky. The Lancaster vanishes into the darkness. Bach doesn't know it, but he's one of the lucky ones. Most night fighters never see a target at all. Back at Fighter Division 3 headquarters, General Major Schmid makes a decision. He orders flak batteries to cease firing over Hamburg. The anti-aircraft barrage might hit German night fighters attempting visual interceptions. It's a desperate measure, but the radar-guided flak is as useless as the radar-guided fighters. Without accurate tracking data, the 128mm guns are firing blind, wasting ammunition on phantom targets. The flak ceases at 12:35 a.m., just as the first RAF Pathfinder aircraft arrive over Hamburg. Hamburg ablaze, July 25, 1943, 12:57 a.m., 22,000 feet above Hamburg, Germany. Wing Commander John Searby, commanding officer of 83 Squadron Pathfinder Force, watches the H-2S radar scope in his Lancaster bomber as Hamburg's distinctive geography resolves into green phosphorescent outlines. The Elbe River appears as a dark snake curving through the city. The Ulster Lakes show as blank spaces in the urban sprawl. The dockyards and shipbuilding facilities along the river create dense radar returns. "Bomb aimer, prepare to mark," Searby commands. In the nose of the Lancaster, Flight Lieutenant Thomas Miller lies prone in the bomb aimer's position, peering through the clear perspex nose cone. Below, Hamburg stretches across the landscape, a vast carpet of darkness broken by scattered lights despite blackout regulations. Searchlights sweep the sky in coordinated patterns, their beams probing for bombers. "Markers away," Miller announces, pressing the bomb release. Yellow target indicator flares tumble from the Lancaster's bomb bay, massive pyrotechnic candles that ignite at 3,000 feet and burn with intense brightness, marking the aiming point for the main bomber force. The Germans below call them Christbäume, Christmas trees, because the colored markers create beautiful, terrible illumination. Other Pathfinder crews drop their markers, red, yellow, green, different colors designating different aim points across Hamburg's industrial districts. The markers burn so brightly they're visible for 50 miles. Bomber crews still over the North Sea can see Hamburg glowing on the horizon. At 1:02 a.m., the main bomber force arrives. 6 waves of bombers, 100 to 120 aircraft per wave, stream over Hamburg in a continuous procession lasting 48 minutes. Each bomber carries approximately 8,000 pounds of ordnance, a mix of high-explosive bombs to blow buildings apart and incendiary bombs to set the ruins on fire. In Lancaster ED-88, pilot Jimmy Flint maintains straight and level flight as his bomb aimer lines up on the red target indicators. This is the most dangerous moment, flying predictably, while German flak batteries fire continuously, hoping for a lucky hit. Shrapnel pings off the Lancaster's aluminum skin. Flint ignores it. "Bomb's gone," the bomb aimer announces. The Lancaster lurches upward as 8,000 pounds drop away. Flint immediately banks hard to port, beginning the escape turn that will take them northwest toward the coast, then across the North Sea to England. As he turns, he glances out the side window at Hamburg below. The city is burning. Thousands of incendiary bombs have ignited fires across 5 districts marked by the pathfinders. From 22,000 feet, the fires look like orange and red flowers, blooming across a dark canvas. Smoke columns rise thousands of feet, creating their own weather, updrafts and turbulence that buffet bombers still approaching the target. By 1:50 a.m., the last bombers release their loads and turn for home. Behind them, Hamburg burns with a ferocity the city has never experienced. 40,000 firefighters mobilize to combat the blazes, but telephone exchanges have been destroyed by bombing, rubble blocks streets, and water mains rupture from nearby explosions. Fires burn uncontrolled for 3 days. The Blohm and Voss shipyard, one of Germany's premier U-boat construction facilities, takes direct hits. 3 submarines under construction are destroyed. U-1011 and U-1012 on their slipways, never to be completed. U-996 sinks at the dockside. Thousands of tons of shipping, machinery, and strategic materials are lost. But the most remarkable statistic is this: of 791 bombers dispatched, only 12 failed to return. 12 losses, a 1.5% loss rate. Typical RAF bombing raids against German targets suffer 5% to 8% losses, sometimes exceeding 10% on particularly difficult missions. Tonight's raid should have cost at least 40 bombers, probably 50 or more. Instead, Window has reduced losses by 75%. As dawn breaks over England, surviving crews climb wearily from their bombers. They're exhausted, frozen, some wounded by flak fragments. But they're alive, and they know they've witnessed something extraordinary. Wireless operator Tommy Wickham steps onto the grass at RAF Elsham Wolds and looks back at Lancaster ED-888. The bomber is scarred with flak damage, holes punched through the tail and wings, but it brought them home. In the fuselage, every window bundle has been dropped. Millions of aluminum strips now litter the German countryside, from the Dutch coast to Hamburg. "Reckon that worked then," Wickham says to no one in particular. "It worked better than anyone dared hope." The secret revealed. Strategic aftermath. July 25, 1942. 9 to 15 a.m. Luftwaffe Technical Research Station, Reichlin, Germany. Oberst Wolfgang Martini, head of Luftwaffe Signals Intelligence, holds a single aluminum strip between thumb and forefinger, examining it in the morning sunlight streaming through his office window. The strip is crumpled and dirty, recovered from a field near Stade by a Wehrmacht patrol that morning. It measures exactly 27 centimeters, precisely half the wavelength of German Würzburg radar. "Brilliant," Martini mutters almost admiringly. "Devastatingly simple." German radar technicians have known this countermeasure was theoretically possible since the late 1930s. German scientists called it Düppel, a reference to a suburb near Berlin where early radar experiments were conducted. But like the British, German High Command worried about revealing the technology to the enemy. If Germany used Düppel against British radar, the British would immediately copy it and use it against German radar. Now the British have crossed that threshold. The secret is out. Martini picks up the telephone and calls General Major Joseph Schmid at Fighter Division headquarters. "The British dropped metallized strips," he reports. "Millions of them, each cut to our radar wavelength. Our entire ground-controlled interception system has been neutralized." There's a long silence on the other end of the line. "Can we counter it?" Schmid finally asks. "Possibly, Martini answers. We can modify radar frequencies, develop narrow-beam tracking systems, train controllers to distinguish real targets from chaff returns. But it will take months, perhaps a year, to implement effective countermeasures across the entire defense network. In other words, RAF Bomber Command now has a window of opportunity, a temporary period where German radar defenses are crippled. The British will exploit that window ruthlessly. July 27-28, 1943. Hamburg receives its second major window-protected raid, 787 bombers. July 29-30, 777 bombers. August 2-3, 737 bombers. Over 10 days, RAF Bomber Command launches 4 massive raids against Hamburg, each protected by window, each suffering dramatically reduced losses. The cumulative effect devastates the city. On the night of July 27-28, a combination of high temperatures, low humidity, and concentrated incendiary bombing creates something unprecedented: a firestorm. The firestorm generates winds exceeding 150 miles per hour, sucking oxygen into a furnace that reaches temperatures of 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Asphalt streets melt. Glass melts. People caught in the open are incinerated instantly or suffocate when the firestorm consumes all available oxygen. Those hiding in cellars are baked alive as buildings collapse above them. Approximately 42,000 civilians die in the firestorm, more deaths in a single night than the entire British Blitz. Over 1 million Hamburg residents flee the city. Germany's second-largest city and major industrial center effectively ceases functioning for weeks. Reich's Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer, later writes in his memoirs, "Hamburg put the fear of God in me. 6 more raids of this magnitude, and Germany might have been forced to surrender." But Window's impact extends far beyond Hamburg. Once the British demonstrate the technology, both sides begin using it extensively. By late 1943, every RAF and USAF bomber mission drops chaff. The Luftwaffe copies the technique and begins using duple against British coastal radar. The radar war escalates into a technological arms race. Germans develop centimeter wavelength radars that are harder to jam with simple aluminum strips. They implement window-resistant tracking procedures and train controllers to identify real targets amid electronic clutter. British scientists develop new jamming techniques: mandrel to block Freya early warning radar, carpet to jam Würzburg fire control radar. Window also plays a crucial role in Operation Neptune, the D-Day invasion. On the night of June 5-6, 1944, RAF bombers fly precisely coordinated patterns off the Pas de Calais, dropping Window in carefully calculated quantities to simulate massive invasion fleets on German radar. Operations Taxable and Glimmer successfully deceive German defenders into believing the main Allied landings will occur near Calais, not Normandy, buying precious hours for troops landing on the actual invasion beaches. By war's end, chaff has become standard equipment on military aircraft worldwide. Modern fighters and bombers still carry chaff dispensers for radar countermeasures. The aluminum strips Tommy Wickham dropped over Hamburg in July 1943 evolved into sophisticated radar countermeasures that remain relevant 8 decades later. But the true legacy of Window lies not in technology, it lies in lives saved. Between July and December 1943, RAF Bomber Command's loss rate drops from 5 and 8% per mission to 3 to 4%. That difference represents thousands of airmen who returned home instead of dying over Germany. Thousands of families who didn't receive telegrams beginning with "The Air Ministry regrets." Window didn't win the war, but it gave bomber crews a fighting chance. And sometimes a fighting chance is all anyone can ask for. The firestorm, July 27-28, July 27, 1943. 11:47 p.m., Hammerbrook District, Hamburg, Germany. Frau Margarete Schön huddles in the basement shelter beneath her apartment building on Suderstrasse, listening to the air raid sirens wail their familiar warning. At 34 years old, with 2 children pressed against her sides, she has endured dozens of RAF raids over the past 2 years. The routine is grimly familiar. Sirens, shelter, bombs, explosions, fires, damage assessment, then rebuilding until the next raid. But tonight feels different. The bombing 3 nights ago, the first major window raid, was terrible. The fires burned for 2 days. Now the RAF is back, and Hamburg hasn't had time to recover. At midnight, the first Pathfinder markers fall, cascading red and yellow flares that turn night into artificial day. The Christmas trees, people call them. Margaret's children stare at the basement ceiling as if they could see through concrete and steel to the pyrotechnic display above. "Close your eyes," Margaret whispers. "It will be over soon." She's wrong, catastrophically wrong. At 12:17 a.m., the main bomber force arrives, 787 heavy bombers carrying over 2,300 tons of bombs. But tonight's bomb load is different from the July 24th raid. Tonight, the RAF has loaded an unusually high proportion of incendiaries, specifically designed to create maximum fire damage. The weather conditions are also unusual. Hamburg is experiencing a heat wave. Temperatures reached 86 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. Humidity is extraordinarily low, and winds are calm. The city is a tinderbox waiting for ignition. Within 15 minutes, thousands of incendiary bombs create hundreds of separate fires across Hammerbrook, Rothenburg-Sort, and Billwerder, working-class districts filled with densely packed apartments and narrow streets. Under normal circumstances, firefighters would contain these blazes before they merged. But Hamburg's fire services are exhausted from battling fires that started 3 days ago. Water mains are ruptured. Fire engines can't navigate rubble-blocked streets. And the sheer number of simultaneous fires overwhelms available resources. At 12:45 a.m., something unprecedented begins to happen. The hundreds of individual fires start merging, creating larger conflagrations. Those larger fires generate intense heat that causes air to rise rapidly, creating powerful updrafts. Cooler air rushes in from surrounding areas to replace the rising hot air. This creates winds. But as more fires merge, the updrafts intensify. The winds strengthen. By 1:15 a.m., winds are gusting to 60 miles per hour, fanning flames and spreading fires faster than anyone can react. This is the birth of a firestorm. Meteorologists would later determine that the firestorm created a self-sustaining weather system, a column of superheated air rising thousands of feet, pulling oxygen-rich air inward at ground level with hurricane-force winds. The temperatures at the fire's core reach approximately 400 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt glass, melt metal, ignite human beings like torches. In the basement shelter on Suderstrasse, Margarete Schön feels the temperature rising. The concrete walls radiate heat. The air becomes difficult to breathe, thin, oxygen depleted, filled with smoke seeping through ventilation shafts. People begin panicking. Some try to escape to the street. Margarete hears the shelter door open, hears screaming, hears the door slam shut again. Someone who looked outside reports that the street is on fire, the asphalt itself burning, flames rising from manhole covers as gas lines rupture. They're trapped. The temperature continues rising, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 110 degrees, 120 degrees. The basement has become an oven. Children cry, adults pray. Some people lose consciousness from heat exhaustion and oxygen deprivation. At 2:30 a.m., the building above them collapses, burying the shelter under tons of burning rubble. The temperature inside reaches lethal levels. One by one, the people in the shelter die, not from fire directly, but from heat and suffocation as the firestorm consumes all available oxygen. Margaret Schön and her 2 children are among the 42,000 people who die in the Hamburg firestorm. Across Hammerbrook, similar tragedies unfold in hundreds of shelters. Some people who attempt to flee through streets die instantly when 150-mile-per-hour winds knock them down and flames consume them. Others jump into canals to escape the heat, only to find the water itself is boiling. Some survive by submerging completely, breathing through wet cloths until the firestorm passes hours later. The firestorm burns until dawn. When survivors emerge, they find entire districts simply gone, reduced to ash and rubble. Buildings that stood for centuries have vanished. Streets are unrecognizable. Bodies are everywhere, some burned beyond recognition, others killed by carbon monoxide poisoning and appearing almost peaceful. Over 16,000 apartment buildings are destroyed, 8 square miles of Hamburg are erased. Approximately 1 million people, 40% of Hamburg's population, flee the city in the days following the firestorm. Refugee columns stretch for miles along roads leading south and east, people carrying whatever possessions they salvaged, many wounded, all traumatized. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, visits Hamburg and is horrified. He reports to Hitler that if the RAF conducts 6 more raids of similar magnitude against other German cities, Germany might be forced to surrender. The firestorm has demonstrated that bombing can achieve strategic effects, not through destroying factories or military targets, but through breaking civilian morale and disrupting entire urban economies. The Hamburg firestorm would not be the last. Dresden in February 1945, Tokyo in March 1945, both would experience similar phenomena, concentrated incendiary bombing creating self-sustaining firestorms that killed tens of thousands. Window made these raids possible by dramatically reducing bomber losses. Without Window protecting the bomber streams, RAF losses over Hamburg would have been unsustainable, probably 60 to 80 bombers lost per raid instead of 12 to 17. Bomber Command could not have maintained such a concentrated campaign. The aluminum strips fluttering through German skies didn't just blind radar. They enabled destruction on a scale previously unimaginable. Window's evolution. From Hamburg to D-Day, June 5, 1944. 10:37 p.m. RAF Falsham, Norfolk, England. Squadron leader Leonard Cheshire briefs his Lancaster crew on tonight's mission with characteristic understatement. We're going to fly in circles over the English Channel, dropping aluminum strips in a very precise pattern, so that German radar thinks we're an invasion fleet. His navigator, Flight Lieutenant Patrick Kelly, raises an eyebrow. An invasion fleet, made of chaff. Precisely, Cheshire confirms. Tonight is Operation Taxable, one of the most sophisticated deception operations of World War II. While thousands of Allied troops prepare to land on Normandy beaches at dawn, RAF bombers will fly patterns off the Pas de Calais designed to convince German radar operators that a massive invasion fleet is approaching, not at Normandy, but 150 miles northeast. The plan is ingenious. Lancasters will fly precise oval patterns, each aircraft advancing slightly closer to the French coast with each orbit. At carefully calculated intervals, they'll drop window bundles, the same aluminum strips used over Hamburg 11 months ago. The window will create radar returns that mimic a fleet of ships moving at 7 knots toward the Pas de Calais. Simultaneously, Operation Glimmer will conduct an identical deception off Boulogne. Small boats equipped with radar reflectors will sail in coordinated patterns beneath the bombers, reinforcing the illusion. German radar operators will see what appears to be 2 separate invasion fleets, each consisting of dozens of ships approaching the Pas de Calais region. The deception works spectacularly. German 15th Army defenders in the Pas de Calais go to full alert, convinced the invasion is targeting their sector. Reserves are positioned to counterattack the invasion fleets. Artillery is sighted on beaches, infantrymen's defensive positions. Meanwhile, the real Allied invasion force lands 150 miles southwest at Normandy, achieving tactical surprise despite months of German anticipation. Even after D-Day, German High Command believes the Normandy landings are a diversion, that the real invasion will still come at Pas de Calais. This belief, reinforced by operations like Taxable and Glimmer, keeps German reserves away from Normandy for crucial days, while Allied forces establish their beachhead. Window has evolved from a defensive countermeasure, protecting bombers from radar-guided fighters, into an offensive deception tool. British scientists have refined the technique, developing precise calculations for drop rates, aircraft spacing, and flight patterns that can simulate virtually any radar signature. The technology continues advancing throughout 1944 and 1945. Bombers carry multiple types of chaff, each cut to different wavelengths to jam different German radars. Automatic dispensers replace manual dropping, ensuring precise quantities at exact intervals. New metallized materials improve radar reflection while reducing weight. German countermeasures also improve. By late 1944, Luftwaffe night fighters use advanced SN2 radar operating at lower frequencies that are less susceptible to window jamming. German controllers develop running commentary tactics, broadcasting general information about bomber streams that allows night fighters to search independently rather than relying on precise ground-controlled interception. The radar war becomes an endless cycle of measure and countermeasure. Each side develops new jamming techniques, then new anti-jamming techniques, then new anti-jamming techniques. Electronic warfare specialists, virtually unknown in 1939, become crucial to air operations by 1945. But window remains fundamental throughout. Every major bombing raid from July 1943 until VE Day in May 1945 uses chaff protection. The RAF drops an estimated 20,000 tons of window over Europe during the war, billions of individual aluminum strips carpeting the continent. After the war, both British and American air forces retain window as standard equipment. During the Korean War, B-29 bombers dropped chaff to confuse Chinese radar. In Vietnam, American fighters used chaff corridors to protect against surface-to-air missiles. During Desert Storm in 1991, coalition aircraft dropped chaff to saturate Iraqi radar networks. Modern military aircraft carry sophisticated chaff dispensers that can eject precisely calculated quantities of metallized strips, carbon fiber filaments, or glass fiber bundles. The technology has evolved. Modern chaff uses materials far more advanced than aluminum foil, but the principle remains identical to what Tommy Wickham dropped over Hamburg in July 1943. Some historians argue that window represents one of the most cost-effective weapon systems in military history. The materials cost pennies per pound. Manufacturing requires no sophisticated equipment, just aluminum foil, paper, cutting machines, and packaging facilities. Yet window reduced bomber losses by 75% during crucial months of the strategic bombing campaign. Those saved bombers meant saved crews, 7 men per aircraft, trained airmen representing years of instruction and irreplaceable experience. The strategic implications were profound. RAF Bomber Command could sustain offensive operations that would otherwise have been impossible due to unsustainable casualties. Window didn't win World War II alone, but it gave Allied air forces a critical advantage during the period when strategic bombing reached maximum intensity. The aluminum strips changed the calculus of air warfare, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most revolutionary. And it all began with Tommy Wickham dropping bundles of shiny paper strips through a flare chute at 18,000 feet over the North Sea, hoping the crazy scheme might actually work. It worked better than anyone dared imagine.